and welcome to the European Business Summit. We're having the second day of a series of Facebook sessions from Brussels. You can join us on Euronews Facebook account where we're having interviews with various speakers. And here with me now, I'm glad to introduce you to Markus, Beyrer, Director General of BusinessEurope.
Correct.
Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
At the opening plenary session, Emma Marchigalia said that compared to last year, a more positive mood is emerging. What makes you think so?
Well, I think very much so. I mean, we see it in the figures and also we see it when we talk to people. You have investment picking up slightly. You have business confidence, which has gone up by 10% since the beginning of the years. We see it in the growth expectations. So you might have seen that last year, 2016, was the first year since a while where Europe grew faster than the US. In the first quarter of this year, so from January to March, we had a situation where in the Eurozone the growth was twice as strong in Europe than it was in the US. So there's quite a number of things we see as positive signals. Growth expectations, we will also revise them slightly upwards. So this doesn't mean that everything is good. Of course, we know that with all the specific factors we are still having, so meaning an oil price which is still around $50, relatively favorable dollar-euro exchange rate, and the still expansionary monetary policy of the European Central Bank, we should do better. So we would like to see stronger growth, and this shows we still have a lot to do. And there's still a lot of reforms to be done in Europe.
Before we get to the reforms, about the situation getting better over the past year, when it gets to the environment and particularly political environment of the past year, that year was quite complicated, wasn't it? And we had to adjust to uncertainty and making new normal. Do you feel more certain there is more clarity now compared to last year?
Well, I think there has been a total change of mood after the Brexit. So after the Brexit, and I would say after the election of Mr. Trump, you had quite a feeling in the market, or some people had the feeling that now everything would go down the slope and you would have more and more populistic anti-European votes. And the opposite has happened. I mean, first you could see that after the Brexit, a number of Eurosceptic countries, let's say the support which is there for the European Union has rather been going up, because I mean this is an old paradigm. When you ask people whether they're happy, you very seldomly get a clear yes. But when you ask them, do you want to leave or do you want to be in this situation, the answer has been significantly different. Then we had quite a number of stabilizing voting results. In my home country, in Austria, you had a clearly pro-European presidential election. You had a clearly pro-European vote in the Netherlands. So the Dutch vote was quite encouraging. And France, of course, is the most, I would say, the most striking result, where you really had a clear pro-European vote, and also something which might open a window of opportunity to bring the European project further. So I would say, as on the economic front, as on the political front, you had a stabilization, which doesn't mean that everything is done, but I think we have turned the corner, and we are on a much better path now.
How about business morale in France now after the election?
Well, I think the mood is good, and I think what France really needs is hope and to believe in their own strengths. And I think the wish is there to reform the country, and I think this is what they need, and this is what Europe needs, because Europe to strive, you need a strong France, which has not been as strong as it should be in the last years, and I think now we have a clear chance to get it back where it belongs.
Do you think that some reforms in France should have been there already for a while, and we're a little bit late with them?
Well, I would say since a long while.
Since a long while.
And we all know what it is. There's labor market reforms, the tax burden is too high. Competitiveness, which is a result of these two stories. So there's a lot of things which should be done since a long time. And I remember when there was the big strikes at the beginning of the century, when Mr. Juppé was Prime Minister, if they had done, let's say, half of the reforms which have been proposed back then, I think the country would be in a better shape now. But I think the chance is there now. I think there's a popular young president who has now nominated a very interesting government. We hope he'll get a clear majority.
He's very popular among businesses.
He's very popular among businesses because he understands. I mean, he's not the person I think who will do. I mean, he will do what is his conviction, but he is certainly understanding the necessities of the business world, which I think is necessary to bring a country like France back on track.
If we go into the needs of businesses on the European level, what are they? Main concerns this day?
Well, I think what we need in Europe is there's a number of things we need to focus on European level. The main points being getting the single market really achieved. So of course I know this is always a bit the same story, but the truth is we need to digitize single market on the one hand, and we need to really accomplish it because it's still full of barriers. Mm-hmm. And if we can really fully leverage this market of still more than 500 euros, this is a big step forward, and there is protectionist tendencies which we'll need to overcome. This number one. Number two is we need to open up new markets, because even if we do brilliantly on European level, it's still a fact that in the next 10 to 15 years, 90% of the growth will happen outside Europe. So this means we will
Which new markets?
Well, I mean, all kinds of new markets. I mean, I think the next step will be Japan. This is very much high on our agenda, and we need to make sure that we bring this home this year. And I think this is, besides the importance of the market, Japanese for us and our market for the Japanese, this has also a strategic component, because meanwhile it seems that our Japanese friends and Europe are the two remaining true heralds of rule-based trade in the world. So it has become a much more strategic issue, but it's also very much an opening of the market issue. Then of course there is still topics in North America. We'll be negotiating with the Mexicans. We will see what will happen with the US. I mean, it's a bit too early to tell, but it's clear that, I mean, this is still the strongest part.
There have been a few comments these days, this past, I don't know, 2 weeks or so, from the European politicians that the deal, the trade deal, is not dead, fully dead. They do hope to revive it in that form or another form, maybe restarting it all, but they do hope that there are going to be good trade agreement and relations between the US and Europe.
Well, I certainly hope, and I'm convinced that we will have good trade and economic relations, because there's a logic. I mean, this is the strongest partnership in the world. We are the strongest in West, vice versa, with the strongest trade. We cover most of world GDP together, and therefore, I mean, there is, whoever is running one or the other country, it's very clear that there's a very deep logic. And I believe that, I mean, this logic at some point will come through. Will this revive, let's say...
Do you feel optimistic about the revival of
Well, I mean, this depends, and also depends on the parameters. And I think, as I say, it's too early to tell, but I think there will be a moment where there will be logic to talk about the deepening again. I don't know when this will be. For the time being, we are building up the relationships again, and I mean, look, there is also signs of hope. I mean, there's a number of things which have been announced, which have not yet been implemented. So we'll have to see. We'll build up this relationship step by step, and at the same time, I believe that there's a deep logic that the partnership between a transatlantic partnership between Europe and the United States of America is simply in mutual interest. But there's also Canada. You know that we have now concluded. Yes. We need to now fully get this implemented, and then we need to relatively rapidly show that it really delivers in order to also change the spin on the debate of the trade. There's South America, where we will be starting talks with Mercosur at some stage. We'll be starting talks with Australia and New Zealand. There's other markets in Asia, and we also need to have some kind of a let's say, of a solution in our approach to Africa. So there's a lot to do on the international level.
Coming.
And as I was saying, I mean, 90% of the growth will happen outside Europe, even if we perform well. Mm-hmm. So therefore, we will have to make sure that our companies have access to these markets.
And from reforms to regulations, there's been lots of debate here at the European Business Summit over regulations here, business regulations on the European level.
Maybe one word on the reforms,
yes.
Because I was talking on the things, I mean, I was talking about small points on the things we can do on European level. Of course, our list is much longer. What we must not forget is that there's also a set of reforms which need to be done on member states level. So there's things you need to do in European level, but then there's a number of things we have been talking about. France, labor market reforms, tax reforms.
Do you think that labor market reform is the top reform to be implemented?
It's one.
In France?
It depends on the market, but you have seen in Spain. I mean, they've done a very successful labor market reform, and they could, from a country which had an incredibly high unemployment, they've created 3 million jobs. They are back on track. They are one of the growth drivers of Europe now. So it's very important to do the right reforms country by country.
The situation is quite complex there in Spain when it comes to youth unemployment, though.
Well, youth unemployment is still too high, but it also significantly reduced compared to what we have seen previously. So Spain is going in the right direction, and this is the way we need to go. But the mix is different country by country, and the instrument we're working with is the so-called country-specific recommendations, as you know. And we in Business Europe, we have a tool for this, meaning once a year, together with our member federations, we do something called the European Reform Barometer, where together with our members on the ground, so in Germany, Spain, France, and so on, we assess whether these country-specific recommendations, which are at the beginning recommendations of the Commission, but then adopted in Council, so meaning also from the member states concerned, whether they're the right ones and whether they're implemented. And the tendency we see is that around 90% is the right ones. Yeah. So this is a big compliment for the Commission and also for the member states that we are addressing the right issue. The problems we are having with this is they are not sufficiently implemented. Because the second questions we ask our member, are they sufficiently implemented? And the result was going down in the last years from the low 20s to below 20%. And this obviously is not enough when you only implement, when you come to a common conclusion, this is the list of reforms you should do, and then only implement 1 of 5, this is not enough to turn around.
To turn it around.
Yeah.
Regulations on European level, this is something very worrying for businesses. They've been saying, okay, we do need regulations, but it's very important to keep the balance in between over-regulating and under-regulating.
Well, I'll give you first a general answer and then bring you an example. So in general, of course, I mean, we need to overcome this idea that you are only a good player if you are designing your own directive. So, and I think on this, quantitatively, this Commission has made progress because there's much less produced overall. There's still things happening where we think they should be, let's say, done on the basis of a better impact assessment or a stronger competitiveness check. But quantitatively, this has been moving to the right direction. We are not yet there, but it's moving to a better direction if you compare what is produced now and what has been produced previously. But to give you a concrete example, it's about the right mix. I mean, we talk a lot about digital, and the digital field is a very important one. And there, I mean, there's one field where we say we will need European legislation, regulation, and where we'll need to be strong, which, for instance, is to overcome the fragmentation we have seen in the markets on the forced local data storage. Yeah. So this is something which is an existing fragmentation. So on this, and this hinders the free movement of data in Europe, and therefore hinders the digital single market. And this is something where we need to overcome this, and this is where we need European legislation to overcome this fragmentation. One example. Other example is when we talk about industrial data, non-personal data. This is an example where we don't think we should have further legislation or further regulation, because we think most can be done in contractual freedom, so data ownership, liabilities. I talk about industrial data, not personal data.
Personal data.
Yeah? So, and there we think that regulation could rather stifle innovation, because the regulator, the legislator cannot foresee what will be needed in 3 years in this fast-moving world. So it's about regulating the right things where it's necessary and not stifling the progress where it's rather hindering and it's not useful.
And how, when it comes to transatlantic digital economy and data flows there, that's also not, that's a bigger picture over there when it comes to Europe and the United States.
Well, it's a bigger picture, but I think it has been solved in an appropriate way with the so-called privacy shield, and I think this is the right approach. Of course, we need to guarantee a certain level of protection of personal data, because this is what citizens, what consumers expect. At the same time, we need to have data flow freely, because without the free flow of data, we'll not be able to trade freely, because nowadays you cannot really trade without having data flowing. because this is very much interlinked, and then of course this goes at the expense of our wealth. So of course we need a balance there, but we need to make sure that data can flow freely.
Do you think that people feel informed enough to understand all the benefits of it and all the threats probably?
Well, I mean, information is always a challenge. I mean,
yes.
And I think this is something many, but also we try to do permanently. And I think there can always be more at the same time. I think those who always say that don't feel informed is not always those who want to be informed. So I think if you want to be informed, you have good chances to get the information. But sometimes when people say they want to be better informed, what they mean is they want to have somebody who tells them what they should think.
Okay.
Which is understandable, but not always the same thing.
But different. Let's get back to the youth in Europe. That's very interesting because we already discussed a little bit the situation in Spain, where even after labor reform, the labor market is quite hard and complex for young people, and overall on the European level as well. We see when we look at labor markets on the European level, the unemployment rates general, and then when you look at the youth unemployment, it's really striking, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think number one, I mean, of course, I mean, it's obvious the youth is the future of this continent.
We do have lots of viewers, and they all wonder, like young people, because they're watching it on Facebook Live, and they're wondering, and they're asking questions, what to do with this situation with youngsters, with youth in Europe?
Well, I mean, the issue is, I think we live in a world where the challenges are higher, but where there's also more opportunities. So this means, I mean, you can do easily Erasmus, you can travel around, there's a lot of opportunities.
This is why we need also single market?
Why we need also single market. But at the same time, I mean, of course, this continent has a responsibility to deliver to these people who are much more pro-European than the European average. You have seen this in the French elections,
Indeed.
you have seen it in Brexit. So we have a strong responsibility to deliver on these hopes. And there is, of course, a number of things which are necessary. One is education, I think, where we are getting better, and it's very important to also focus on the right things. And I think when you broadcast this in Facebook, I mean, to go to the digital world, this is absolutely the right thing, because this is where we will provide for the most jobs in the future. But then it's, of course, also to get all the framework done to create the jobs these people will need. And this will only happen if we I mean, to give you the French example, if we get rid of the obstacles which are there to create jobs.
What are those obstacles if we take French
Well,
example?
I mean, again, labor market reform. I think, to be honest,
okay,
I mean, I don't want to
reforms...
mingle too deep with the French
okay,
situation.
No, let's not go
but
to
I mean,
France.
let's say the 35 hours week. I mean, this will not help to provide for a lot of jobs in the medium run, and we have seen it very clearly in the figures. So this is something which, if I was responsible, I would change rather rapidly, or
Do you think businesses feel motivated enough to hire young people?
Well, I think
some more initiatives.
Well, I
maybe
think
it's going to be useful.
this depends very much on the markets. I know many businesses who are very motivated to hire young people, but of course, if you look at the figures in some countries, I mean, we have also to see that we are not yet there. I mean, in my organization, we hire a lot of young people, and this is very rewarding, because they bring in a lot of fresh blood and a lot of good ideas, a lot of motivation. So I think the motivation is there, but of course we need to do more, because if not everywhere, I mean, we also have countries with very low.
We have some examples in Europe when when the rates.
And I think it's also a bit linked to things like I mean, when we talk about apprenticeship and dual formation schemes. I mean, this is very often linked also to a much lower level of unemployment, and then we need to be, flexible in all directions. We need to link this. We need to have possibilities where people come up with a dual training scheme and then might move on to some spreads at university. So I think on this we're just at the beginning of learning how to apply this. And look, I mean, I ask myself the same questions for my children, who are now. I mean, my daughter is now 20, and she is studying in Vienna, and my son has just had his graduation in the British school last week, and it's about what he will go to study. And actually, at the end of the day, the real advice I give them is do what you're really interested in. because at the end you can only be good in what you really like to do. And in the case of my son, which would have been very much my interest at this age, but of course later we will have to see what will be his field of application. I mean, he wants to study history. Okay, I mean, let's say in my age back then, I mean, people would have said, okay, study rather law or economics,
Okay.
because you will know what you will do as a job. But okay, in his kind, this is what he really likes to do. But then he thinks, okay, he might advise, I don't know, films or video games from the historical side. I'm not sure this will work, but it's a very precise idea. And at the end, my conviction is that young people should do what they really are interested in, because you're only good in what you really like to do.
On this inspiring note, thank you very much for this interview.
you.
There was Markus Beyrer, Director General of Business Europe. Thank you very much for watching.